Welcome to Disambiguation. I'm your host, Michael Fauscette. Each week we interview experts in AI, generative AI, and business automation to help business leaders understand how to use these tools for the biggest business impact. In our show today, we look at the role of AI in customer experience research. I'm joined by Ranjitha Kumar, Chief Research Scientist, User Testing. Ranjitha, welcome.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I followed user testing for a while, and I think a lot of the things that you're doing around user experience, I think, are really interesting. So I think now, kind of bringing this in and looking at how AI sort of fits into this space, particularly around the depth of research that user testing does, will be really interesting. So why don't we start though with you just doing a quick introduction, and then tell us a little about your role at user testing.
Sure. So, yeah, I'm the chief scientist at User Testing, which translates to I lead the AI product strategy here. And I've been here since 2019. I'm also an associate professor of computer science at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign.
Nice. Um, so give us a little background on how user testing is integrating AI into the customer experience research, particularly around the use of large language model powered techniques.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an exciting time, and I think customer experience research is an exciting domain for AI. In fact, I think there's actually opportunities to integrate AI into the entire customer experience research process. If you think about creating a test, AI can help you figure out what to test, who to test with. Then once you get the results of a test back, you might use AI to quickly analyze the results. And then at the end of it all, if you might have run one test, but you want to understand how that result fits into the larger context of all the customer experience research you've gathered. And so I think AI can really help figure out how to map all of how to map that particular test back onto all of that data that you have available.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, obviously, when you're collecting different types of research around user interaction, it's not just one mode, but it's multimodal, right? So how did the language model, Gen AI sort of powered um, research fit into kind of the summarization and the way you can use that research that you collect?
Yeah, I think customer experience research is a very interesting domain for that reason. You have a lot of different data streams you can collect. A lot of it can be explicit feedback. So, in the form of, let's say, think aloud audio or survey questions. And it can also be implicit feedback like screen recordings of what participants are doing on your website or digital asset. And so there is this opportunity for LLMs to come into play here to kind of understand what's happening across all of these streams of data. Now the real challenge is some of those data streams that I described to you, they are non-language data streams. So they're not actually represented inherently in text, right? And so converting those data streams into a canonical format where the LLM can understand across all of these data streams is kind of the challenge there.
Mhm. Yeah, and and I would imagine there's so much is a much richer data set than just text, right? I mean, it's a much more complicated analysis that you're performing because of all those different data types.
Yeah, I think qualitative that's kind of the goal with qualitative research. It's to get to the why. I think there's a lot of quantitative methods that help you identify the what and what is the problem, and then you want to actually get to why is this problem happening with my digital experience? Like, what are people feeling? What are they thinking? And so I really think that having this rich understanding of what's happening
Mm,
and what's going through your customers, mind while they're doing things is really important.
mm. And even reactions or emotions that go around that, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you can obviously ask them to tell you about what was difficult, but you can also, yeah, capture their very frank emotional reactions
Mm.
if they're experiencing frustration.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, are there challenges with integrating the language model into this research? I mean, how is that technically difficult, or what are the challenges?
Yeah, I think I talked about this a little bit, but yeah, most of these data streams are not inherently expressed in a language format. And so you have
Mm,
to, for example, take clickstream data, which is literally people clicking on different elements on the digital asset, and you have to express that, well, at least you can express that in a textual format where you might actually write out a little behavioral transcript that says, hey, someone clicked on a search button here and that took you to a results page, and then they clicked on the second results item. And so you're actually taking the clickstream data and the design data, and then converting that into this
mm,
behavioral transcript. And then you can imagine we can start saying, well, this is the behavioral transcript. Maybe there was also audio where people were explaining what
mm,
they were doing or how they were feeling. And then you want to kind of layer that stream on top of this behavioral transcript and say, okay, on this screen, this is what
mm,
people were saying and this is what they were doing. And so you can then start to ask the LLM, can you actually start summarizing across these different data streams, given that you
mm,
roughly know what people were saying and doing around the same, time or on the same screen. And
mm,
so the real challenge there is figuring out how to, first represent all of these data streams in a canonical format or representation, and then chunk them and then align them,
mm,
so that the LLM can reason across all of these different streams. Now there are multimodal LLMs now as well,
mm,
and so they're like GPT-4 or Gemini, right? You can actually pass in, for example, image data and text data and audio data, and they can reason across those data streams. But we're still in the early days. It is more expensive to use these
mm,
multimodal LLMs, and it's not clear like if the performance is better. So
mm,
it's what I still think it's early days. So I do think, at least for us at user testing, we've really seen an advantage for coming up with these canonical representations for
mm,
these different types of data streams, and then aligning them in a way that the LLM can reason over it.
mm. It's interesting because if you think about the problem, has sort of always been you have these different data streams, and then you end up a with somebody or a team trying to synthesize all of that into one sort of summary, I guess is the right word there. And with the model and integrating AI into this, it sounds like you're pulling all that sort of multi-layered information into something that's a story that you can really apply to the scenario much more easily than perhaps it would have been than you would have been capable of if you were just doing that human-based behavioral analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. I think saving time and getting speed to insight, that's the goal here.
Mm,
So our customers frequently say how this type of feature allows them to really spend a lot of the time they're usually spending for qualitative coding, and like actually focus on storytelling and
mm,
how this should influence decisions, right? Like how do
mm,
these insights actually influence decisions? And so, yeah, you know, I think it's pretty difficult to do qualitative coding on just one data stream. Like if you just
Right.
had transcripts, right, reading through and doing qualitative coding for that already takes a lot of time. Now you've got with a lot of customer experience research platforms, right? You have different data streams, so that's
Mhm.
already the complexity is already multiplied, and now that means that you probably only do this for 5 sessions
Mm.
with participants. And so if you have AI in the process, right, this means you can have multimodal because the AI is helping you deal with
Mm.
all of that complexity. You can also have a larger number of participants. So instead of just doing it for, let's say, running this test for 5 participants, you actually say, well, maybe I want to increase that number to 20 or 30 or maybe even 100. And so I
Mm.
think that was one of the things with qualitative research before. It really, you did it with a fewer number of people because you were trying to go deeper and it took a lot more time. And so it was sort of not feasible to do it with
Mm.
larger numbers. But I think AI opens up that opportunity,
Mm.
and really then you're kind of like almost blending together qualitative with quantitative research, I think, for the first
Mm.
time.
Mm. It's interesting because I mean, obviously the speed at which you can do the analysis is a big benefit, but the real output there is increased accuracy because you can consume a much larger data set in a much smaller period of time, and a much more mixed modal kind of data set as well.
Yeah,
Mm.
I do think, it this could give you superhuman capabilities, right? Because I do think
Mm.
it's very hard for humans to manually look across different modalities of data and say, okay, I see these patterns or correlations across all these data streams. That's just very difficult for a human to do, whereas
Mm.
it's something that an AI can do pretty easily. And I also think it's interesting because that's where I also think, even with survey data, where it's usually, let's say, tabular,
Mhm.
it's pretty easy to aggregate and summarize survey data, right? But the interesting thing here, I think, is that with LLMs, you can start, detecting these correlations automatically. And, this was something a researcher might have had to do themselves before, where they sat down in their favorite data exploration tool of their choice, like, I
Mm.
don't know, Tableau or Excel, and they
Right.
had to kind of do all of these this manual data analysis. And now, at least, kind of to a first approximation, you could get these insights back where it kind of shows you, like, hey, when people are saying this, they might have chosen this type of choice answer, or if people chose this multiple
Mhm.
choice answer, this is how they rated the experience. So even with data where it's pretty easy to aggregate and summarize, you are seeing that time savings come in.
Mhm. Interesting. The the other thing underneath this I'm curious about, because you're one of the when you talk about behavioral data, which is, obviously where we're really trying to go, we're trying to understand the behavior of the user to really improve the experience. A part of that is emotional, and that's difficult. But I would assume that in applying AI to the problem, you could do more sentiment analysis in a much more accurate way, which could, in fact, help you tie that story together, that behavioral story together more accurately.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I really like about the user testing platform is that you can, on a task, collect both the audio data,
Mm.
the face data of the participant, and their click data, or the screen capture of what they're
Mm.
doing on their website, and all of those data streams have an element of emotion to them, if you think about
Right.
it, right? You can certainly read people's emotions on their faces. you can hear it in their voice. You can
Mm.
also analyze what they're saying to understand emotion. You can also um, see how people are interacting with the screen, not where they're clicking, but just how they're clicking. Like, are they rage clicking? Are they scrolling a lot? And so, actually,
Right.
those types of signals also give us, um, yeah, those types of data streams also give us signals on how people are feeling. Are they feeling
Mm.
frustrated? Are they confused? Are they lost? So, yeah, I just think all of these different data streams can even be analyzed in different ways to understand what's
Right.
going on.
Yeah, that's exciting. So we still obviously we have humans involved in this process as well, and that expertise is important in the analysis. But how do you balance the two, the use of automated insight and then the human expertise to interpret and then apply them, in this customer experience research?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, we just have to I think address the elephant in the room, which is that AI gets it wrong. And
Mm.
it gets it wrong. It's a probabilistic thing. And so the goal here is to speed up the jobs that humans are doing, that the AI can help out with. But at the end of the day, you have to have a human in the loop, first to really
Mm.
verify that whatever the AI is saying makes any sense. And so, with a lot of the features that we develop, actually, I should say, with all the features we develop, we really make sure there's a fast way for a person to check whether or not the AI screwed up. And for
Mm.
UX researchers, it's actually very important that you have evidence for every sort of AI prediction or AI generated insight you're putting out there. And so that's what we do. We link you back to the raw evidence from, let's say, the
Mm.
video or the transcript, depending on what type of test it was, to really give people a quick way to verify that the the insight was accurate, right? Because
Mm.
otherwise, if the UX researcher now uses that insight to summarize and produce other insights, right? Like, you're just going to be giving that misinformation and amplifying that, and it could lead to bad decisions. And so it's very important
Mm.
that with every little piece of insight like that you are auto generating, a user can quickly verify that it's
Mm.
correct. And the I think that's one of the things that's really that, like, if we looked at all of our learnings from the stuff we've put out there, I think that's one of the most important
Mm.
ones where it really, really resonates with customers. They both value that they can see the evidence, and that
Yeah.
it's very, like, they can get to it very quickly. Because again, if it took
Mm.
you just as much time to verify the insight than it did to generate it, then what, you're not really
Yeah.
saving anyone any time.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that definitely doesn't improve speed if you have to do everything more than once, right?
No, no.
I
So yeah, I mean, you can't take the human out of the loop.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Well, so underneath this and this, I'm just curious about this because, like, if I'm using AI, generative AI in a customer service context, for example, I ground the model by building out some sort of combination of RAG and maybe tag if I'm using structured data or whatever. But in this case, it's a little different because the contextual data, I guess I'm not sure exactly how do you do that? How do you ground the model, or is that really that really is a part of the human function there to ensure that the outputs are reasonable?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because for a specific test, right? Like, if you run one test on the user testing platform, uh, the prompt itself can have information about what type of insights you're trying to get to, right? And
Mm.
certainly you can get more user input to tell you what kind of insights you want. But you have to remember there's also the test plan itself. And so
Mm.
the test plan itself has a lot of rich context
Oh,
for
that
the
makes sense.
prompt. And so you
Yeah.
know what type of insights you're getting to. And so we do not use a RAG system actually for one test because we do most of that just within the prompt. We basically, it's domain expertise that we've
Mm.
embedded in the
Right.
prompt. But it's interesting you bring up RAG systems because you can imagine, and this is something we're going to release very shortly, actually, hopefully in Q1 of next year, which is you can think of it as a Q&A system over all of your research data, right? Because the time where a RAG system actually is important for us is when people are trying to now understand that single test in the context of all the experience data that
Mhm.
they have, or they're
Right.
just trying to answer questions about their experience data. And then you're trying to sift through all of these different tests or different third-party data that you might have uploaded onto our platform, and we're trying to help you make sense of it. And there, we really have to do that initial retrieval to find out, oh, what is the data that's even
Mm.
relevant to this question, and then do that additional, inject it into the prompt, and then do that additional
Mm.
like, let's answer the question for you as a second prompt.
Yeah, that's interesting. So in a single test, you've got a test plan that really helps you build the prompt with the right context so that you are helping ground the model and get to the outputs that you're looking for. But if you're looking at a broader perspective, you'd want RAG to give you all of your data, the context from all of those different tests to be able to provide a much more accurate output at that bigger question level or overall question level. Interesting.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, if somebody asked you what was the thing that really bothered customers the most in the last month, right? That's when you kind of switch to that RAG
Right.
system. And you might find that, hey, you don't even have to run more tests because the answer is already in the set of tests your org might have
Mm,
already run,
right.
or you might find that you have to actually go out and run more tests, right? And so I
Mm,
really like that as a kind of inroad to
yeah.
even figure out, like, do you need to do more testing?
So do I have the answer and I just didn't realize it, or do I need additional data that would help me validate this and come up with that output? Yeah, that makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense. So, so underneath this, and this is a big topic lately, has been, specialty models or different sizes of models. I mean, there's a bunch of different ways you can slice the language model to make it function in that specific use case. So, are you using generally available language models, or is there a use case here for something that's more specifically trained around the the function you're trying to do around user testing?
Yeah, I mean, given that all of these technologies are so brand new, I would say we're playing around with everything. Just,
Yeah.
to understand how to use all of this stuff and map the right use case to the right technology. And
Mm,
so I think it really is that we're trying everything, and we've put a few solutions out there in the hands of our customers to see how they like them. And I'm sure we'll find out in a few months we might have to change everything. I don't know, like everything's evolving so quickly. So
yeah.
I will say we try to experiment with every type of architecture we can and figure out like
Mm,
I do think that's part of my job actually as chief scientist, is to figure out how to map technologies to their use cases or in a particular domain. And so yeah, we're really trying everything.
yeah. I mean that you're right. Things change so quickly. I mean, I,
Yeah.
I was I was on a show earlier today talking about like the announcements that I thought were interesting over the last few weeks, and one of the things that jumped out to me was this. this sort of shift that we're starting to see in language models from the pre-trained idea. So I've massively trained this on a data set, and it then functions off of that data set. Maybe I give it a live internet connection, so it does do some real time, but the training is the actual base knowledge level to something that starts to actually be self-learning, and so it doesn't require as much pre-training. It actually teaches itself as it's used in the environment, the context that you're using it. So it seems like that could be a really exciting advance, especially in this where you are you are moving across this new data set around every test, so that you do have to learn how to interpret that, and then build off of those outputs. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that's an exciting avenue for the future. I do think right now we do have to still do the work almost with the larger pre-trained models, just because they give you really good
Right.
baselines and they're so
Yep.
easy to prototype with. Like you can build solutions very quickly. But I do agree with you. I think the future is probably around more of these like smaller, more task specific
Mhm.
models. And so yeah, at some point we'll probably cross over, but the tricky thing is to, even when you have lots of data, getting the fine tuning to work well and be beat some of these pre-trained larger language models. It can be very tricky. And so I
Mm.
think it's one of those cases where you end up building the fast solution regardless, because you want a baseline, and then you start
Right.
experimenting with some of these more specific task-based models where maybe your data gives you an edge because you have it. But I do think it's trickier in a sense to get those to work well and to outperform, right now at least, outperform some of the solutions with larger pre-trained models. And so I think it's going to be an evolution, but we're not quite there yet.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's an evolution, but boy, it's the fastest evolution I've seen in quite a while. That's
It is true. Yeah, yeah. I mean, lots of exciting ways to solve similar problems.
I'm curious about how your customers are applying these. Do you have any examples, or and I mean, obviously you can't do too specific, I understand, from a customer perspective, but can you give us some idea of how customers are using this to build better user experiences for their customers?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's a lot of appetite for these AI capabilities. It really helps UX researchers, as I mentioned before, save on time. And certainly the evidence that we help you drill into from the AI generated insights, they really help customers in the sense they can then grab those examples and put them in slideshows or whatever they're using to communicate to their stakeholders. Because at the end of the day, I do think those videos themselves, or those video clips, are really powerful at showing, as you were saying, like emotion and just how deeply somebody feels frustration or delight when they're using your digital experience. So
Mm.
I think all of that's really resonating and working well. On the flip side, I think there's a lot of appetite, but sometimes companies are not ready yet to kind of make the leap into the LLM Gen AI space. And so
Mm.
oftentimes I think we still have to help our customers see the value, and in the sense that, like, while they're UX researchers want to use it, like, the companies have policies where they can't use a particular type of LLM in their according to company policy
Mm.
for security reasons. And so we'd have to turn off the AI features for that customer. But I do think that's just something that's going to exist for another year or two. And then, I
Yeah.
do think everyone will see how valuable this is for just, productivity and getting their jobs done.
Yeah, yeah. I think, I mean, I've definitely seen that more and more companies that were doing very contained and limited pilots are finally starting to move things into production more and accept. I think as we've gotten more used to it, build more trust. That certainly helps. One of the other things that comes up though, so I'm curious about how you're thinking about this, is the idea of biases in the AI generated insights. And ethics and bias and privacy, all those things kind of come out a lot when we talk about AI. So how are you looking at that from a potential bias perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. I always try to go back to first principles there and think through how all of those concepts apply to our problems. For example, if you're just considering summarizing a single session with a single participant, right? I
Mm,
think there's a lot there isn't a lot of risk there. You're not really generalizing across different populations. Like you're just trying to say like for this participant, here are the main takeaways, right? And I think
mm,
then you go to the test level and you say, okay, what can we summarize at the test level? Well, the nice thing about a test still as a atomic unit is that you
mm,
have a test plan, as I mentioned earlier, and you have a target audience that um, you were giving the test to. And so
mm,
again, you're not trying to just generalize across a lot of different demographic data. You've basically said, okay, here's the set of people who are going to take the test and here's what they did, right? And so
mm,
I do think the risk is pretty minimal there again. And then you go one level higher and you say, okay, now we're going to start talking about how do you generalize across tests, right? And maybe
mm,
even across different experience data. And I think that's where things get trickier because, first of all, you might not have had the same test plans. You might have had lots of different test plans in your account. You might have targeted a lot of different audiences. The data you get back from third parties, like let's say you had a social media feed that you were ingesting or that you were
mm.
uploading into our platform, or you were giving us data from like Zendesk or
Mhm.
something, like just other
Right.
places where you get experience data. Well, you might not even have the demographic data there about
Mm,
who's generating that experience data, right? And so then if you're coming back and saying, I want to generate these very kind of general insights across all of these different types of data, I think you can get into problems if you're not careful. And so there you have to be very thoughtful about what types of data you can aggregate.
mm,
Maybe you can't aggregate a lot of data. Maybe you still have to kind of um, select summary statements from different tests individually and just up
mm.
level them to more of like a report where it's very clear that all of these data points are coming from different sources. And again, they can also come from different periods of time. So what is
Mm,
being said now might not be the same as what is being said like 6 months ago. And so you can't just aggregate data from 6 months
right.
ago with data from now. And so, yeah, there's so many different ways you could kind of get this wrong when you're generalizing.
Mm,
And so I
yeah,
think that's the level for us, at least, where you really have to be mindful of, you
mm,
know, bias and these other types of problems you could
yeah.
run into. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense, and I guess because of the fact that you're dealing with your use of systems that also change, you have to make sure that you're staying consistent to the version, the baseline, the whatever, when you do that summarization, or you really could be misled in some pretty dramatic ways. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
makes sense. So we talked about this just a little bit, but I'm curious about what else you think here. What other tell me, get out the crystal ball for a minute, I guess, and tell me a little bit about what you think is coming. So what future developments or innovations do you see here in the use of AI around experience research?
Yeah, I mean, I at least think the grand vision here is, and I alluded to it a little bit earlier,
Mm,
is being able to really bridge between quantitative and qualitative experience
mhm,
testing. Because to me, as we make qualitative research data just easier to understand, and at scale, then you're really bleeding into the quantitative side.
mm,
And so I really do think there's a future, for example, where you could have your analytics platform, like let's say, you have analytics on your website, Google Analytics or something,
mhm,
and it's monitoring what people are doing on your website. Now you might have a few funnels set up where you're really trying to measure KPIs on those funnels, and you notice some anomaly in one of those funnels. And
mhm,
then you say, well, I wonder what happened. Like, why is this happening? Right. And usually, right now, at least on the analytics side, you might do some more A/B testing, or you might have hypotheses where about why these things are happening, but you don't know
mm,
for sure. So let's imagine a future where, hey, actually, instead of just being like there is a problem, now you can actually maybe intercept users who are, uh, doing the thing you don't want them to do.
mm,
Intercept some of those users on those key funnels, and ask them, like, why are you doing what you're doing? Like,
mm,
what is there something on our website that is really bothering you, or did something change that we don't realize? And so then you've intercepted that user, you're getting them, you're prompting them to answer these questions, and you're collecting again a lot of that rich data that can be used for qualitative research, right? And
mm,
so, like in that example of the future, like I really think you're kind of smoothly blending between the different
mm,
types of methodologies. And I think that's the most fascinating thing, at least to me right now in the space, is how siloed all of these
mm,
methodologies are, when at the end of the day all you're trying to do is optimize the digital experience, right? So
right.
everyone's trying to do those same things, but you have all of these different tools and all of these different methodologies that work very differently, right?
Mm,
And so I really think that quantitative methods can inform qualitative methods and vice versa.
right.
So yeah, hopefully, I actually think all of um, this investment in AI in this space actually helps me, like, make it all the same.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean that's an interesting point. I hadn't really thought of it in this way, but you're right. There's you've seen the evolution of all these different channels of data over time, and some companies came at it from an analytics perspective, some from from more of a behavioral video monitoring, click stream. I mean, all those different ways that you could pull data together, but having something that synthesizes across all those data sources to make it into one experience and one experiment to get to that experience, that's really powerful. Hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, if we're even going a little beyond, I think there is some early evidence that generative AI can, for example, generate design alternatives, right? And
Mm,
so you could even have, once you like figure out there's a problem and you know what
mm,
the problem is, you could generate the fix, and then you could really have it
mm,
um be part of A/B testing framework where you say, hey, like, I generated the alternative, I've already launched it, I've
right.
driven a small portion of the traffic there, so it's not too high of a risk. And when
Mm,
we see that, hey, the performance is better or equal, like, we can flip it
mm,
so that we flip it over to the better design. So yeah, I
mm,
actually think you can truly imagine a future where and it's not too crazy, I think, to imagine a future where you have this holistic system for optimizing a digital experience.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting way to think of the way this evolves and fairly quickly, I would assume, based on how quickly we've seen things move over the last couple of years, where you really do build a system that's much more comprehensive. It not only helps you collect the data and do the analysis and come up with several permutations of potential outcomes and test those really quickly so that you do get to the most optimized solution much more quickly than you could have ever done in the past, or maybe
Yes.
even more
Yeah.
accurately than you could have ever done in the past. Yeah. Wow, that's incredible. So that's really all the time we have today. Although it's a really interesting conversation,
Yes.
I could keep going. Um, but before I let you go, one thing I always like to ask at the end is, could you recommend somebody, a resource, a thought leader, that you think that the audience would get value out of, checking out and following?
Yeah, sure. So I like to recommend the People Plus AI research
Mm,
website. It's coming out of Google, and I think they've just put forth this very thoughtful set of user centered machine learning guidelines. And so
mm,
I frequently reference that in my own classes that I teach, and
mm.
I frequently send it to designers and engineers when they are designing AI powered features. So yeah.
Great. Yeah, no, that's a great resource. Thank you. I appreciate it. And Rajintha, thank you so much for joining today. Really interesting conversation.
No, yeah, thank you for having me. And this was really fun. Thanks.
Thanks. And that's the show for this week. Thank you all for joining. Remember to hit that subscribe button. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star rating on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform to help others find the show. For more on AI and other software research reports, briefs, and blog posts, check out arionresearch.com. If you have AI, generative AI, or business automation expertise, either as a provider or as an end user, email your information to disambiguation@arionresearch.com, and we'll see if we can get you on as a guest. Don't forget to join us next week. Disambiguation is an Arion Research production. I'm Michael Fauscette, and this is the Disambiguation Podcast.